We're about 1 month out from Cyclocross Nationals, and it's my goal this year to land on the podium of the elite men's race, which means a top 3 finish. All of November, I only have 1 weekend of racing, which means I can dedicate a lot of this month to training, which is exactly what I'm gonna do before I head to Hartford, Connecticut in December. A few weeks ago, I did a podcast called the Stoked on Spokes podcast. And on it, I was asked what I might do to change my result. He said, I've gotten a lot of 4th and 5th and 6th place finishes at Nationals, which is respectable, but he asked me, what could I do to maybe change that? And I think he was implying, how do you get on the podium?
So over the years, you've kind of got a really good consistency when it comes to Nationals. I mean, I remember in Louisville, you got 4th place, but you've had a good track, and I think it was like a 4-year span where it was like 4th through 6th place of that consistency. But what do you think about that, and what does it take to, break that?
Yeah, it'd be nice to break that.
And that's a really good question. And it had me thinking, man, maybe I need to do something radical. So I've decided to implement the Hail Mary of training methodology, block periodization. What is block periodization? It's basically just going really hard for an entire week of training, which is quite radical given the fact that most weeks I only give myself a max of 2, maybe 3 workouts, hard, intense workouts a week, and now I'm giving myself 5 hard workouts in 1 week. That's a 250% increase in intensity. Sounds pretty radical. So why would I do this? Well, it's kind of considered high risk, high reward training, and I could cite all these different science articles for you, or I could link a video of a guy who already did that in another YouTube video in the description below, which I will do. But seriously, I did talk to Dylan, and he did tell me that I should do this simply for the fact of, what do you have to lose? And I was convinced. So here's how I did it. 5 days, 5 workouts, a bunch of TSS, a bunch of volume. I was already going down to Townsend, Tennessee anyways. This was my favorite spot to train. It's only 4 or 5 hours from where we live, and we already had this trip planned beforehand anyway, so it worked out. And so what I was gonna do was on day 1 and day 2, we're gonna be VO2 focused, because naturally those 2 days I'm gonna be the freshest and I can hit those higher watt numbers that I'm shooting for. So day 1, I was going to get there and do 6-minute VO2s. The goal was to do 6 by 6 minute with 6-minute recovery. Pretty straightforward. I got there, I did that. It was about 2.5 hours. I ended up with somewhere around, let me check, 32 minutes of time in zone. That's where we were at on, that was Tuesday. Now Wednesday, day 2 of the 5-day block, it was another VO2 day. I was already kind of feeling some of the fatigue from the day before. I go out for my other VO2 session. I was going to do, the goal was to do an 8 by 4 minutes with 4 minutes rest VO2 at about 420 watts, whereas the day before was 400 watts, so a little bit higher but shorter duration. And everything went according to plan for the first 4 intervals. I was doing this on a pretty decent climb. This is the Newfound Gap climb, which takes about an hour to get from bottom to top anyways. So it worked out well, but after about 4 intervals, I realized there's no way I could do this for another 4 intervals. So instead, I had 2 options. I could have decreased the watts, or I could have decreased the interval length. And so I went with decreasing the interval length because I still wanted that 420 watts because cyclocross requires higher wattage output. So I decided to do 2 minutes of VO2 and 4 minutes of rest, and I kept doing that basically until I got to the very top of Newfound Gap, which ended up putting me at somewhere around 25 minutes of time in zone at VO2, which was still mission accomplished. We come to day 3. This is my biggest day of training throughout this block. I was going to do one of my favorite rides. This is from Townsend, up and over the Foothills Parkway and up and over the Tail of the Dragon, a famous motorcycle road that was a bunch of fun. And the weather was nice. There weren't that many cars and motorcycles out, which made it even better. And my goal for this ride was just to accumulate as much time at threshold as possible. And so on all the climbs, I was going to threshold up the climb. And so that's 1 climb there, 1 climb to the Dragon, and then 2 climbs back home. big climbs. And so by the end of that ride, I had accumulated about an hour and 10 minutes of time in zone of threshold, which for me, my threshold I have set is about 360, and that's about what I averaged for most of these intervals. Now, day 4 is where things get pretty cool. Dylan had said this in his video, actually, that there might be this turn of events where you would think that you would be really fatigued, but you feel amazing.
After this, though, something interesting happens. You actually start to feel really good on the bike.
Friday, day 4, this is what happened. I didn't even know what I was going to do. I was like, should I do tempo? Should I do threshold? I don't know how my legs are going to feel. I get outside, I feel good. I decide to go for that higher intensity threshold zone versus tempo, and I knocked it out of the park. My goal was, again, 350 to 360 watts. I averaged 365 for most of my intervals. And here's the kicker. My goal was to do 6 by 10 minutes with short rest, only 2 minutes of rest between these. But I ended up doing 7. I added on another interval. What? How does that even happen? I don't know. I felt amazing. So I just added one on. Why not? And so by the end of that, I had an hour and 6 minutes of threshold or higher. And then the last thing, I kind of faltered. I had to babysit the kid. Not babysit. Is it babysitting if it's your kid? I don't know. I had to watch my kid because CJ was at work that day, and usually I'm trying to like squeeze a trainer ride in during her nap time. So I was doing that, and I only got a little over an hour in on the trainer. I got 2 20-minute tempo over-unders, where for 20 minutes I was averaging about 300 watts, but every 4 minutes I was jumping up into VO2 for 1 minute. So I call those tempo over-unders. I did 2 of those for 20 minutes. Not that great of a ride if it was only like an hour and 10 minutes total, not very high TSS. But to top things off, after dinner that night, I did a gym session and a 30-minute hard run because I was watching the Namur World Cup and it got me all motivated, so I was running harder. And so the last day was kind of a mix of all these different things. And then we come to today, and I feel pretty tired, but I feel pretty stoked to see how it all plays out. And by the end of the week, here's where I stood. 17 hours of training, 950 TSS, a negative 49 form, and a 144 fatigue. Bada bing, bada boom. That's the lowest form and fatigue I've seen on Training Peaks since I did an ultra marathon in March. That's nuts. Block periodization is considered high risk, high reward because if I don't properly recover from this huge training stimulus I've created over the last 5 days, it could have negative effects on my performance over the coming weeks. However, if I properly recover, then hopefully it'll give me that new boost of fitness that I needed. And a lot of times what'll happen is high-level athletes will hit this plateau and they need some kind of new stimulus or new training to kind of bump them out of that plateau. So I'm really hoping that that's what's happening, is that I'm bumping myself out of a plateau. I'm gonna get that spike in fitness, and if I recover properly, I'll have a really good ride at Cyclocross Nationals, but I guess we'll all find out in about 4 weeks' time. Me and Dylan Johnson have started a coaching company called Ignition Coach Co, where we take racers and develop them into coaches. Both Dylan and I are both racers and coaches, and we believe those two things go hand in hand. The fact that I'm a coach makes me a better racer, and the fact that I'm a racer makes me a better coach. So all of our coaches are elite level racers themselves. When you are looking for a coach, look no further. Ignition Coach Co, we can hook you up with a free consultation with any of our coaches. Be sure to check us out at ignitioncoachco.com. Link is in the description. Ignition Coach Co, developing coaches, connecting.